So the city of Jodhpur is called the Blue City, and that's the old city. And nobody has done anything here, so all the resorts and the hotels are all outside on large kind of ground like palaces. But no one has done a luxury hotel in the old city. A lot of that is because the old cities are very, very high density and they're very alive. So it's not a touristic, it's not a touristic thing to do, unlike say Morocco or even Rome or Barcelona. And Jodhpur has two main things. This is the Mehrangarh Fort, and that's the King's Palace. There's the Umaid Bhavan, it's a colonial structure. So that's the only modern structure that is, of any significance there. So that's the Taj Hotel now. So we had this long conversation about why he wants to use us. Because I was really not sure why he was coming to us, and I wanted to be very clear that he was clear that what we would bring on board. That time we had only done architecturally only one house, and which was nothing great. It was almost like our first brush with architecture. He had really liked the work we were doing in the fort. We did the museum shop, which was done with no money and no resource. Which he really liked, and he said, "No, I'm clear, I'm going to work with you," which was a big risk because he had investors. They were foreign money in, and it was his first hotel. So this is our first piece of first work of architecture which we really got commissioned for. So our site is somewhere there, and that's when we found the site. That's what it was like. So you enter the site through little kind of streets like that. So it's not the classical way of arriving at a hotel. And this also was a big challenge for us for construction and for how do you manage a relatively large project with almost no truck movement. The thing we started looking at is that what people so far are doing in Rajasthan is they are recreating. So you have this sense of nostalgia. Yeah? So you either have people who build new buildings, like this is the arora or they make new buildings in concrete and plaster and they make it look like palaces. So and then the interiors are like this so-called fort royal thing. Or you have authentic old buildings, but again the interiors tend to become this whole nostalgic, revivalist, whatever, in some cases pseudo-revivalist story happening. And then we said we need to create our own space. So we are talking what people need now and what we feel the world is moving towards is authenticity. So it's not about packaging something, it's about actually expressing what is relevant today. And how can we give back to the people what is theirs. So you get a relevance to what they have. And one of the big things in Rajasthan which is still there today is access to the same craftspeople and the same materials with which they made these palaces. But there's no relevance to make those same palaces again today. So we said, how do we create something that's authentic and it is for today? And yes, there is a huge relevance of all the old buildings. So you respect them, you celebrate them, you kind of enjoy them and you engage with them, but then you do something new that has its own vocabulary, which is relevant for today and which is because there is whole issues of authenticity of material and craft. So why should I create an arch and a column in plaster? It's a set. So we're not building sets. Are we looking at ways in which architecture can be created, which is contextually relevant across the board, not just for a touristic thing. So the first step was reusing the old buildings. That was the gate when we found it. So that's the entrance to the property, and that is how we found the site. So you enter and you have these three old buildings, which when we studied we found that they were about 17th, 18th century buildings. And psychologically we wanted to take ownership of the fort and the mountain. So when we started scraping off, and there were some alien elements like this which we dismantled. So this was a kind of colonial structure which we dismantled and moved out and became the reception. We started dismantling sites. Again, we reused most of the stone at site. And to a point where we started getting this kind of composition of the fort, the mountain, and our buildings. And so our entire site is made with this local stone, which is from a quarry 10 kilometers away. As you can see, we opened up that, and so this courtyard became a termination point. We said that these three buildings become obviously our jewels because they're authentic old buildings and they're beautiful buildings. So we got the craftspeople in to restore them. So we studied the buildings, we use the same, they use lime mortar, they don't use cement mortar. So there are craftspeople there who already work with it. And we said what our hotel cannot be accommodated in these three, so they become more public kind of activity. So this becomes the coffee shop, that becomes the spa, and we have an al fresco restaurant on top. We wanted to create one space for outsiders who are not hotel guests, and then that became that space. And we started looking at how would the new buildings come up until we came to this idea of what really got us architecturally was that when we entered through the gate is, that whole fort opens up, right? And we realized that if this is a hotel, this gate will be open all the time. You cannot open and close it. So then you give away the story. So our first block became the second gate. So our main block becomes the second gate. And then we do three other blocks which frame. So we didn't want to kill the relationship of the three old buildings to each other. And then the relationship of the fort to the three buildings. So on a very small site, how do you make the hotel disappear? Once you come through this gate, the main hotel is behind you. These buildings become a part of the city, you'll see. You kind of read these and that becomes a canvas for this, and this becomes a canvas for this. So they start framing the buildings. So you can start seeing the compositions of our hotel and the fort. So that's the plan. And we were successful in doing a circulation which made the guests feel very private without cutting them off from the city. And the services move along the periphery. So the new was a huge challenge for us because we were very scared. How do you do like a new Rajasthan? So fortunately we had some context of the blue city and we had the stone from the region. And we said that the new buildings will be very simple and they will only be negative spaces. So they will frame the site, they will frame the city. They will have character, but they will not be too fussy. And for the architectural principle, we looked at the traditional architecture, which is basically these passive double skin structures, passive cooling double skin structures, which they were made for various purposes. One was for privacy because the queens you couldn't be seen by the men. So they used to look at everything through jalis. So that's why India is associated with jalis, because there was this whole issue of privacy and thing. And of course for ventilation, and because of the mass of the stone, it absorbs the heat and then it lets it out, so it lets the air go through. So in section, that's how the building started to look like. So what we looked at was where the roof forms start kind of merging with the city in the blue plaster, and the lower forms respond to our structures at site, which is stone. So it was a very unconventional, it's not a traditional massing exercise, so it's not got one language, it's almost like two vocabularies but trying to sit together. And all the rooms have balconies to sit out, and there's a screen which is the second skin of stone on both sides, which allows the building to breathe and also protects it. So that's how the building got developed. We had the lower kind of three rooms, one with garden and the other two with these balconies. And the rooftop became like these suites, which are the scale of the city houses. So it's not a conventional suite, it's like up, down. You get a sense of what the homes in the city kind of are. So it doesn't have a traditional scale. And then we wrapped this whole building around in stone. To make one part of the building, we wanted to make the stone openable. Yeah? So if you want to make the stone open, then you need to make it very thin. Now when you make it thin, they do hand carving only in 50 millimeter. They need thick stones, otherwise the stone breaks. So we had to make a pattern that was simple enough to cut in thin stone. Because to do these complex patterns, we already have a lot of these patterns at site, and they are never as beautiful what you do today because they take many years to do.
Right.
So we said we won't do any of this, and we just moved to a very simple pattern, which was completely driven by function, and which was at the lower level they're very thin to give some privacy, and as they go up they become more transparent to see views of the fort and let the sun a little bit filter in. And again we skinned, so we did a very simple structure which could be built locally in concrete and columns and beams and slabs, and then we skinned the building. Again, it was all done by hand with no cranes, nothing of these slabs. So there were these like 3.5 meters slabs of stone which came on bullock cart, because you couldn't get trucks in. So they would come by bullock carts and they would be loaded, and these guys would cut them at site, and then they would be put up by hand. So the whole building's been, it's completely handmade. As the day goes, the whole building changes color and everything is monochromatic. So part of the conscious decision we took was that the new interventions would be very quiet, because for a lot of foreigners and a lot of even now Indian city people, Rajasthan is like a huge overload of color and sense. And when you come home in the evening, you want something quiet, and, which you can connect to when you look at outside, and yet it is Indian. So we stuck to the materials and the craft. So it still feels, you go there, it still feels handmade, everything. But the challenge was the other side, which had to open to the fort, and we tried various experiments, and finally we managed achieving a system where we could fold the stone. That's the owner. He never believed it. He never, for a long time he said, it's not going to work, let's forget it. I mean, so that's the building, or the one of the buildings with the sunken gardens. And the nice thing about the buildings is it's animated through the day. So you know, when people kind of using it, they open different parts of it. So it's a very living thing. So the client also was like a very, he's a fun guy. And he never really had an architectural brief for us. It was very experienced. So he said you walk into the room, and the whole idea of people go on vacation is they should want to have sex. So you walk in and kind of, can you give me a room like that? And I mean, I didn't know how to. I don't know. But from what I hear, it is very successful. Yeah. And no, it is like that. It feels really like very sensual and very romantic. So these are the balconies. So the balcony can be a part of the site, or if the stone closes, then it becomes part of the room. So there's this kind of in-between space which you can connect out or become in, and which works really well. And the bathrooms also have views of the fort. And it's very unusual proportion. We have like a 1.3 meter by 7 meter kind of bathroom, and it's a change area. So the big debate was the materials, and again we very obviously went for traditional materials that they've been using there. So this is cement terrazzo has had a very big a lot of skilled labor even doing that now. So we poured the floors and the furniture and everything. It's very cool, and of course it's low cost relatively. And we worked with stone, and we started generating patterns that are much more graphic and much more contemporary. And a lot of them were developed by the craftspeople themselves. The bathrooms are white terrazzo, all poured, the rooms are black, and then you have these very thin walls of stone, which are just huge slabs of stone that are clamped to the floor and the ceiling. So even little details like the air conditioning, it's all cut out by hand. And the cost of doing this was cheaper than putting an air conditioning grill and taking a plywood wall. Yeah, so even we did custom design the lamp. They have a huge furniture industry there. So we worked with those people, developed lamps. The doors are in, the furniture is built by a local. So we designed all the furniture, and he made it there. Even the headboard is in stone. The textiles were developed. And the room, of course, changes in feeling through the day and into the night. So again, this whole counterpoint of the old framing the new and the new framing the old. This is one of the old Havelis. So somewhere you don't get views of the fort, but you got little details like this little mirror. And if you can see, the big challenge was, how do you stay connected to the city and yet be private? Because you don't want to wall it off. It's a very delicate balance, because you don't want to isolate yourself from the fabric of the city. So that's why you are there. In fact, for us, that has been, the client constantly comes and says what makes him the proudest is that the people from Jodhpur come and tell him, you've given us Jodhpur back, like a new, they feel that they own it.